You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Hey guys, Spanners here. I am in Miami, ready for the Grand Prix, and we are here partnered with Global Poker, whose parent company, VGW, is a proud and premium partner of Scuderia Ferrari HP. And because of that partnership, we have, for the first time in 11 years, got an interview with an active F1 team member. So we're going to be speaking to Francesco from the Ferrari strategy team, and I am doing that interview solo, and Matt is devastated to be missing out on that, but we are going to bring you that after the Miami Grand Prix. So we're going to be looking forward now to the Miami Grand Prix, and with me is Jonathan Simon to help me dissect and plan what we're going to be looking out for the weekend. Hello, Jonno.
Hey, Spanners, makeshift setup. I love your setup. It might be the world's greatest makeshift podcast setup, better than your one that you had when you were on holiday a couple of weeks ago.
Well, what you can't see is that in front of me, I have draped the entire wall in duvets and pillows to try and get rid of some of the reverb. But look, the reality is I'm out on the road, and I think sometimes the audio listeners can tell when I'm in a different setup and when I'm on holiday, and sometimes they can't. So we have done the best we can. But looking forward, there are some big questions to look forward to over the weekend. I think we're going to start with McLaren. There's some news stories. I desperately want to cover the claim from George Russell that you could argue that he should be a two-time world champion. But I think we start with McLaren, Jonno. What are the big questions around that championship fight, and how much does Max Verstappen feature in it?
Big time. And you know, it's a topic we've talked about all year, and we're going to continue talking about it till the end of the year, just because, you know, it is going to be a McLaren title battle versus Verstappen, as you said. I did see Alan Jones, the 1980 F1 world champ. Let's not forget, for anybody new to the sport, Alan Jones, once a world champion, very good driver back in the day. He labeled Oscar Piastri a future world champion. Now, whether that's this year or next year, and also alert, Aussie labels Aussie world champion, so not breaking news there, but anyway, that's what we've heard from Alan Jones. So, you know, we've heard that many, many times before. Valtteri Bottas was named world championship material. Lance Stroll was as well. Alex Albon too, just letting everybody know. But in terms of this battle, I want to change the definition of something, Spanners, because I was listening to your last podcast or the last race review, and I don't want to define Lando Norris at the moment as the better driver. I would say he's the quicker driver. Would you agree? But at the moment, Piastri's been the better driver overall.
Yeah, so, I mean, last season, people were talking about there being a higher ceiling for Piastri, like more potential. And then, obviously, in the off-season, I was questioning why McLaren really jumped to make sure that they signed Piastri straight away. And I was wondering what people were seeing. Now, you could argue, like, his qualifying performance negates everything I've said, goes against everything I've said, because he's consistently put it on pole or near pole or ahead of Lando Norris. The question mark for me is that Lando Norris has been underperforming. So he had a really scatty build-up in China. He had a really terrible Friday, a bad sprint race, and then obviously he put it in the wall in Saudi Arabia. So you go, okay, at the moment, we haven't seen them head-to-head. So I can't even answer your question, because if we go by last season, then clearly when Lando Norris delivers a qualifying lap, he is, for the vast majority of the time, faster than Piastri. But at the moment, Norris is delivering nothing. Piastri, though, he's not disappearing. So last year, he was disappearing for weekends. And you go, right, it didn't matter what Norris did. He was still maybe qualifying 6th or 7th or something like that. But this season, he's done what looks like the maximum that the McLaren can do. So to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I do think on race pace, Lando Norris has shown he's been quicker, because even though he's qualified badly, he's come through the field, and I think the gap between him and Oscar have been different. Now, people can argue and say, well, Oscar's at the front, so he's not pushing as hard, and he's saving his rubber.
Yeah, that's what I was about to come back with, yeah.
Exactly. So I do think that Norris is still quicker. I don't think there's any argument about that. But I think, can he pull that qualifying lap together? He hasn't been able to do it this year. That's what's cost him. Bahrain qualified 6th, started wherever he did in Saudi Arabia. Was it 10th? Can't remember. Started down the order after the crash. So it's all down to qualifying for him. But it reminds me, Spanners, of, do you remember 2016? when Lewis Hamilton had his poor start to the
Oh,
season. And
I
Nico
barely
Rosberg,
ever think about it, John.
Nico
Barely
Rosberg,
ever think about it, John.
well, Rosberg just capitalized on it and won, 4 or 5 races to start the year until the collision in Spain. And this is the vibe we're getting. Norris, in that year in 2016, Lewis Hamilton lost the title. And now Lando Norris has an opportunity to win his first year, and he is, at the moment, going to lose it if he keeps doing what he's doing. And so, if you run 2016 10 times over, I do think Rosberg only wins once, which is what happened in reality. And I think that could be the case this year with Lando Norris, unless he gets things together quickly.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Yeah, there's definitely a Doctor Strange of F1, sitting there glitching away, and they say, how many scenarios did you see? I saw 10. And how many did Piastri win? Just 1. The thing is, though, the scoreboard doesn't lie. So Piastri has won 3, and at the moment, it looks like Piastri is favourite. It's like we're starting to look increasingly mad because actually everyone I've spoken to on a podcast on the panel is saying what you're saying, that we think Norris is quicker, but he's not delivering, right?
Yeah.
But that starts to look more and more redundant. Let's say Piastri wins in Miami because they turn up with the fastest car, and then something happens to Norris, he makes a mistake in qualifying, and Piastri wins. That doesn't really change our argument, but we start to look really stupid because he's won 4 races this season. And so say in the Premier League, over 38 fixtures, 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, the scoreboard doesn't lie. So I think you could point to the end of the season and say, with F1, the league table doesn't lie. I mean, with F1 more so than, say, soccer, because you can have a 25-point turnaround in a race. So you can have a race where someone DNFs and someone pulls away 25 points. So it can lie a little. And I think in 2016 it did lie. Maybe in 2012 it told a little fib. But generally speaking, the championship table is a reflection of who's doing better. And right now, it's Piastri. And whether we and whether we say, well, okay, Piastri's not as good, but he's performing to how well he can perform more often this season. It's kind of a redundant point, and I feel like I'm not even a Norris fan, but I'm starting to sound like a Norris apologist.
It's more I'd say it's more so. There's no issues, and to me, there's no issue with me saying that Oscar Piastri will be a world champion this year, and he's the better driver. We've seen this before in Formula One. There's been quick drivers who can't put together race weekends, are inconsistent. Mentally, they're not strong enough to win a title. Piastri might have just been able to do that this year. Let's see how we go. It is only a small sample size. We're only a few races in, because there is a very good chance, Spanners, that we come together for a podcast in June or something like that. We talk about the Canadian Grand Prix and we're like, Lando Norris, 30-point lead in the championship. What just happened? So there could be a situation in that world, but there could also be a world where Norris, again, in Miami, has another qualifying blunder, and Oscar goes away and wins the race, now opens up his advantage to almost, 15 points. It's about 10 points at the moment is the gap between the two. Funnily enough, did you see what Zach Brown said about his dig at Alpine? Basically said, thank you, Otmar, for giving us Oscar Piastri, because, Alpine let the ball drop a few years ago. Yeah. That was a very funny dig from Zach Brown. If anybody remembers when, that story in 2022, I won't go through the whole story, but Alpine really had their hands on Oscar Piastri and didn't want to sign him. They wanted Fernando Alonso over Oscar Piastri, and then Alonso ended up leaving. But anyway, I think a great pickup and for McLaren, and so far it's paying dividends. They may well just have their next world champion, and it may not be Lando Norris at this stage, but let's see how Norris goes.
It's going to be an interesting one. And so Zach Brown was also asked about whether they would have a collision. The big question is, how will they manage this competition between the two of them, and whether there will be any team orders. And he did say, which I think is fairly realistic, that it's inevitable that something is going to happen, that they're going to end up colliding. They're going to have their Barcelona-Mercedes moment.
But the way he played it off was kind of like, oh, it'll happen, it's all good. Not to say that he'd be okay with his two drivers crashing. It's more to say, like, when it happens, he's trying to play down, because he knows it'll be a media drama-filled clickbait headline, which, by the way, doing some research for this podcast, just getting some news topics, clickbait, again, is the worst it's been of all time. I'm kind of getting sick of it. But anyway, we'll move on from that. I do think Zach Brown's managed that really well. He knows the drama of what happened in 2016. Going back to that season, the collision between Rosberg and Hamilton blew up into a massive news story, even though you knew that, well, one of these two is going to win the championship anyway. Mercedes have the car to win the title. Why is it such big drama? But it was. And so Zach Brown's already knowing that the inevitable will occur. These two may collide or some drama will happen, and he's already trying to mitigate the drama of that already.
And when it does happen, whose fault is it going to be? So I actually think wheel to wheel, I think Norris was done by Piastri a couple of times last year. Like Piastri's by far, I think, the savvier and more aggressive wheel to wheel. Like the way he dealt with Verstappen a couple of times now is something that we'd wished Hamilton and Norris would have done in the past. So we had that Abu Dhabi of the just don't jump out of the way. I'm so happy with that, Jonno. Do you know how often I've been like, when Verstappen does that, I'm going to send it down the inside and I'm going to barely hang on to the track limits and you have to drive off the track to avoid me. And Piastri just held his ground and just went, no. And then reading the interpretations of the rules perfectly in Saudi Arabia. By the way, those new interpretations of the rules that Stuffy posted on our group chat, I'll go through in a second. But it seemed like he knew exactly how to interpret those new rules. He knew he was ahead enough to be entitled to the corner and just drove to that second apex. And I think, like, for example, you look at Norris in Monza last season when Piastri was on the outside. Norris did everything he could to make sure he left this fair car's width to the outside, ended up losing the back end, and then got overtaken not only by Piastri, but by Leclerc as well. And I worry for Norris, if it's a straight fight and they're allowed to fight each other, he's going to take forever. So he took forever to pass Hamilton a couple of races back, I think. And he was looking for that perfect, clean overtake, not willing to risk any contact, whereas Piastri seems willing to risk contact. He's going to do what he's going to do. And the short term of it is you avoid an incident like Sainz against Tsunoda in a recent race, where Sainz held his ground, Tsunoda hit him, got on the throttle too early, hit him, damaged Sainz, ruined Sainz's race. But overall, you build up this reputation about somebody who's not just going to yield or fold. And I think the drivers think that as long as you're robust, Norris will back out. And they know if they're attacking Piastri, he's going to keep his car where he wants to keep his car.
We saw this in his Formula 2 days. That was the first time I thought that Oscar Piastri was the real deal. I watched him at Monza one race, and I was like, oh, he was going around the outside of somebody at the second chicane. And I said to myself, oh, he's going to have to back off. That won't work. And then somehow I was like, he's ahead? What just happened? But only the best of the best do that. His racecraft is top notch. I think that's an underrated aspect of Oscar Piastri. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because in a battle between him and Lando, I think a robust Piastri who gets his elbows out, and there's not going to be much room, like you said in Saudi, or like you sort of alluded to in Saudi Arabia, got his elbows out against Max Verstappen, defended his position really well. Verstappen ends up with the penalty. I think Oscar's got that in his hands too. The only thing he'll need to work on is, like I said, is the raw pace. If Norris can figure out the consistency, I think he's got him on raw pace. It's going to be a good title fight. This is almost two even drivers, but with two different skill sets.
Exactly.
Know?
So, I think you were right or it's interesting to bring up the Rosberg-Hamilton comparison. So in the Rosberg-Hamilton comparison, Rosberg was a little quicker in qualifying, generally, by about a couple of tenths. And you could see that Hamilton was favouring a race setup. And then you could see that, during the first stint, as the tyres start to drop off, Hamilton's maybe conserved it a bit more. And generally, you think he had the overall better race pace. But Rosberg, every single time they were going to go wheel to wheel, Rosberg really made Hamilton pay. Even if it didn't ultimately pay off, things like the Austrian Grand Prix, where he just beelined straight to the exit and ended up hitting Hamilton and then got a penalty for that and damaged his wing. But Rosberg was willing to do that. Barcelona 2016 really was like, no, I'm taking away all your space. And in my opinion, fully just drove Hamilton off track. But Hamilton knew that every single time he was going to be passing Rosberg, there was like the kicking legs of a donkey. And there was Spa 2014 as well. Hamilton got up Hamilton was ahead in that, and Rosberg just left his nose in. So Hamilton's constantly got this feeling of there's a Rosberg wing. Wherever I am, there's a Rosberg wing or wheel waiting to bite me. And then when you go to the Bottas rivalry, Bottas, again, could outqualify Hamilton any given time, but didn't have that killer instinct with overtaking, was pretty passive when it came to defending, especially against Verstappen, but also against Hamilton. So he had none of those tools, and Hamilton, you could see the difference. So with Bottas racing a bit nicer, Hamilton was able to cruise to those championships, even though Bottas was arguably as fast over one lap pace. And so you go, right, here, yeah, I think ultimately the race pace of Piastri isn't going to live up to what Norris has got. But you start to think, well, Piastri's just got enough weapons at the moment. And look, we could all look foolish by the end of the season building this up. Maybe I should have stuck to my guns. This time last year, it was Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz was the guy. Do you remember? It was all like, if he hadn't had his appendix out, he'd be leading the championship. He'd be going into the Miami Grand Prix as the championship leader. So, yeah, things can change. And I think the early season calendar at the moment, we've rubbished ourselves a little bit by saying this. But when we say the early season calendar is unrepresentative, I understand that's a problematic phrase. However, I'm happy to say that the early season calendar does not seem to be representative of the rest of the season. So as we go into Europe, as we go to the Americas, the results have sort of been shifting and changing over the course of the past few seasons.
You're right. And when we get into these sort of, because we've been to a lot of street circuits, you know, Miami, Saudi Arabia, Australia, that's half the season so far has been street circuits. We've had a couple of wet races too. So talking about wet weather, Miami this weekend. Looks like it could be wet, but we'll get to that in a second.
No, I can do that. Do that since you want.
Well, do you want to do that now? Because I do want to talk about George Russell. That quote was insane, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Well, okay, with the weather here, kids book author Andy Amendola, who is at Hagerty Motorsport here in Miami, and he was saying to me, the thing that's been missing is a bit of Florida weather. And it can be really unpredictable. And we've been here since Monday. So we came from Talladega. Me and my wife have been here since Monday. And we've just seen these fronts come in and out. And when it rains, it's wet. And the thing is, also, it dries up quickly. So if you've got weather fronts coming over, as is predicted on Sunday, you could see a splash of rain. And then the drivers having to react to that. And then very quick battles and decisions about when to then go back to the slicks. That could really define this Grand Prix and this circuit. If Miami circuit has a wet race and a bit of a thriller, I think everyone we're here will be delighted.
Most certainly. And I believe when I check the forecast, it could be raining all weekend. Now, not to say that it is 100% a chance. Normally, if it says 40% chance of rain this weekend, in F1 terms, that's 4%. You always got to divide it by 10 because there's barely a chance it's going to rain all weekend. So there were thunderstorms that were going to hit the race. I think those have moved to Monday now, like local time in Miami. So I don't think you'll be all right, Spanners. You won't get too wet. Just make sure you don't stay out till 5 a.m. because that's when the thunderstorms will probably hit. The other thing is, if it does rain all weekend, I actually was talking to a few of our listeners in our Patreon chat about how drivers are only allowed 4 inters and 3 full wets for the weekend. Now, it's never happened, but what happens if you run out of those because it's raining the whole weekend and you need to practice with them? There is a regulation out there that allows Pirelli to give teams an extra set, which I didn't know about because I always wondered that for the last 15, 20 years of watching F1, since Pirelli and Bridgestone have provided this. What is the situation? Since Pirelli came into the sport in 2011, that's the situation. They can provide an extra set of inters if they run out, just so you all know. In terms of dry tyres, the C3, C4, C5, they're being brought to Miami, second softest available. Now, that's the same as Australia and Saudi Arabia. Now, as far as I know, Spanners, at Saudi Arabia, I thought that was a decent tyre to bring to the race. Am I wrong? Do you remember? I don't know if you remember from that race, but I think that this is a good set. I think it's a good trio there.
Well, in Saudi, we saw the medium only look to drop off. The only time we saw it was with Piastri when Verstappen was trying to build that 5-second gap. But then the hards were bulletproof. So even then, when they saw, we can't keep up that pace, we're starting to see drop off once we try and hold on to that pace, he could just go onto the hards and they lasted forever. My suspicion would be that would be much the same in a dry Miami scenario. I think this has got one stop written all over it in the dry.
I hope not, because I do hope the hot weather. The race is 4 p.m. local time, so it won't be sunset. There is talks of bringing this, making this race a night race. It's contracted till 2031. That could happen. That may as well be the best thing for this race in the future. But for this weekend, anyway, it'll be in the daytime. I just hope we get some rain. I know, I know that's it sounds like a broken record of an F1 fan, but man, the rain has been good this year. It's been fun to watch, and I do think we need something else to spice the season up. We could see something like Zandvoort. Do you remember a couple of years ago in Zandvoort where, drivers were indecisive on the first lap? Do we pit? Do we start on inters? What happens? Yeah. It could be a situation like that because, in Florida, that kind of rainforesty, tropical type humidity weather is unpredictable. I used to live up in Cairns for a year, and I can tell you it was very unpredictable.
I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for rain at any time, but I think particularly where the racing has been pretty poor this season, and before the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, every single race and sprint race had been won completely lights to flag, with no overtakes for the lead. You might have had someone was ahead because the leader pitted, but there was no net changes for the lead the entire season. And then for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, there was one change for the lead, kind of, because of the penalty. But so in reality, Piastri fairly overtook Verstappen. Verstappen should have been behind Piastri that whole time. Therefore, one overtake for the lead in turn one, and then nothing else. So I think F1 fans are craving just a little bit of excitement. And you look at Miami and go, well, where's that going to come? I think, what's the races coming up? We've got Monaco, we've got Imola, and especially when you're trying to get your kids into it and you're trying to get your family around. Oh, watch F1, it's really good. And then, it's all very well saying it's a fascinating battle in the relative box. Watch the lap times, look for any tyre drop-off. That's fine, but there hasn't really been any tyre management races this season either. We had high wear in Bahrain, but there was no tyre management because they knew it was going to be whatever amount of stops it was. They just knew, right, push this tyre, okay, at lap such and such, just get off it. And they got off it long before the wear came in. And really, I think F1 has lent on tyre wear and creating a pace difference between cars on tracks at various times to provide entertainment, and it hasn't happened.
What frustrates me too is watching a driver who has taken care of their tyres and then not try to overcut the competitors around them, particularly Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton. He seems to do a great job in the first stint, and then I'm like, oh, this is going to be a great second stint to watch Lewis Hamilton try and get that tyre offset and come through the field, and then Ferrari pit him anyway. That could be a question to ask in your podcast with your Ferrari strategy member that you're bringing on, because to me, the overcut, I feel, is super underrated. Now, I don't know if that's something we'll see this weekend, but, it is very hot out there. The track temps are going to be high. So if it comes down to a tyre race, that's could be a possibility. The C4 this year, let's not forget, and that's what's being brought. That's the medium compound this weekend. It's a little bit more durable and less prone to degradation than what it was last year. So Pirelli went a step softer this year because last year at Miami they had the C4 was actually the soft last year. So now they're bringing in the C3, which is essentially last year's C4. So as much as I got excited reading that, I then said, well, the tires are more durable, and that's why they've been very kind of as I said, durable this year, and it's been hard to wear them out. So I don't know why they didn't go a step softer, especially for this street track, like C2, C3, C4. Would have been my thing to go with. Then you'd have a situation where, if you remember last year at Spanners in Miami, Norris, I think George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, they didn't even use the softs in Q3. They went for the mediums because the wear was so bad. So I think Pirelli were trying to avoid a situation where the teams go, well, the soft is so bad, we don't even want to use it now. So it's a tricky situation with these tires, is it? Because you go softer, the teams don't want to use the soft. You go harder, we get these one-stop races. Can't we have like a C3.5, a C2.5, and a C1.5 or something like that for this race? That would be good.
So, I mean, we've covered McLaren going into Miami, the potential conditions, the tyre choices, but we haven't covered the Max Verstappen factor in all of this. And from going to the miracle lap, oh my God, the Suzuka miracle lap, oh my God, how did he drag that tractor up into pole position. Well, it turns out not really much of a tractor. It's a pretty good car that he's got there. And I think, look, if we look at what we've been saying about the McLaren drivers and their various strengths and weaknesses, I think it's likely that actually Verstappen doesn't have any of those weaknesses that we've highlighted in those McLaren drivers. He's got a slightly less good car, a slightly less overall performing car, but is able to deliver. And what then we've basically got is a natural bop. We've got a natural balance of performance. So it's like Verstappen has a natural kind of handicap of a slightly slower Red Bull, but it's clear like those are the top two cars. So I think Verstappen's still in it.
What's worse is that Yuki Tsunoda seems to be performing better and better every time he jumps in the car. So then the myth of Max Verstappen being, oh, maybe he's the greatest driver in the history of the sport because nobody can match him. At the moment, Tsunoda's proven to be, well, I know it's only been 2 races.
He hasn't strung it together yet, has he, for a race weekend?
I shouldn't get ahead of myself, but what Helmut Marko said, I listened to one of his interviews this week, and he wasn't wrong. Tsunoda had the pace to finish P6 in Saudi Arabia. P6 in the second Red Bull, I think's not too bad for your second or third race. You know,
we're back to Perez levels, aren't we? Like original Perez levels, and Perez got slaughtered for those kind of results.
He did, but the field is tighter this year, and so I know we're supposed to talk about Max Verstappen. I've kind of changed the topic. We'll go back quickly, but what I'm trying to insinuate here is that the field is tighter, and so what we saw in, like, if you remember Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello, sometimes the gap would be 8 tenths from pole to Barrichello, you know, from Schumacher. Now, if that happens again, you know, in today's Formula One, that's a Q1 exit almost. Like, you can't be 8 tenths off your teammate. And so for Tsunoda to be 3 tenths off, I think's what he needs to do. It's the job he needs to do. What Lawson was doing was certainly not the job. What he needed to do was Q1 exits and looking very slow. So back to Verstappen, the reason I brought that up was I think it kind of hurts the myth a little bit that he's the greatest driver in the history of the sport. Not to say that he might not end his career that way, because it's looking very likely. There is the recency bias too, that there isn't really anyone challenging him in his prime. The last we saw was Lewis Hamilton 2021, and now Lewis Hamilton's aging and doesn't seem like he's at his best anymore. So I don't know what to make of it. You know, I do think.
Well, we're not doing a GOAT battle here, are we?
No, of course.
I'm going to disagree, Jonno. I'm going to disagree that Tsunoda's performance is doing anything to sort of tarnish or challenge Verstappen. I think that's way previous. I don't think that's. I think what we've got is a situation where the Red Bull is weird. The Red Bull's a weird car to drive, and other people are struggling to adapt to it, whereas Verstappen has evolved with it as it's evolved. But I don't know. I think he's definitely in this title battle. I think people are talking about the McLarens taking points off of each other is the wrong way to look at it. I think it's just it's a straight three-way fight for the title. I don't think McLaren are ever going to turn around and go, okay, Lando, Piastri's ahead, therefore we're now going to prioritise Piastri for the rest of the season. It's not going to happen. We saw last season. They aren't going to do it.
Do you think Max has a good chance to win in Miami? I think he is. I'm not saying he's favourite, but I do think you're right. Like, that car is, some people claim, no, that's the fourth fastest car in the top four. No. I think it's the second best car, for sure, behind the McLaren.
Yeah, it's the clear one.
Yeah,
it's the clear second best car. So basically, if everyone hooks their lap up, I think Norris gets pole. So if everyone goes out there and hooks their lap up, Norris gets pole. If Norris, who seems to be going for, you know, the ultimate lap win or bin at the moment, if he bins as he's been doing recently, then I think then Verstappen's got pole there as well. So unless he puts a wheel wrong, so yeah, I think Verstappen's got every chance to go out there. He's going to qualify top 3, and also then he's got an opportunity to on a track where you can defend. He's got an opportunity to defend. So I don't know. Why don't we put our necks on the line here and try and predict the top 10. So this is the Missed Apex Miami Grand Prix top 10 predictions.
Do you want me to actually go through the top 10, like one by one? Do you want me to give it a shot?
That's the segment I just introduced.
No, because I think on rails, you're right. I do think it would be Norris P1. I think that's a fair long-term bet with the way the cars are at the moment. Piastri P2, Max P3. It's weird. Like, how do you even... I'm even confused with the top three. Then George Russell P4. I think that's a certain. George Russell is on it this year. P4 for him. But would you put Leclerc, Hamilton, Antonelli, like that's your next group? Tsunoda, like that's the unknown. Where do you put Tsunoda in your top 10? Because you don't know where he is on raw pace at the moment. Saudi showed promise. Before that, didn't show as much promise at Suzuka.
Stop circling the drain and give me your top 6. How's that?
Okay, then I'll do that. That's my top 3. So we'll go Norris, Piastri, Verstappen. I'll go George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Antonelli, Hamilton. That's 7. I honestly can't believe I just said that. My favorite driver, Lewis Hamilton. I just put him last out of all the best drivers. Then Tsunoda, and then we'll go Hadjar. And I'd say Alex Albon's in some pretty good form. I'm going to wrap up the top 10 with Alex Albon.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to go slightly differently here. So I'm going to go for Verstappen pole with Piastri second, and just slightly ahead of Norris, who gets slightly squirrely out of turn 18 on power. That's what I'm going to go for it. So Verstappen, Piastri, Norris, and then I think Leclerc should be P4. I think the Ferrari is fundamentally a better car than the Mercedes. So if they get it together, I think Leclerc is on good form. I think he's one of the better drivers this season. So if you say, who are my top 3 drivers so far this season? It's Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell. So I'm happy to put Russell P5. And then, honestly, I don't think Tsunoda and Hamilton are really in that battle yet. So I'm going to go for Sainz P6 in the Williams, then Tsunoda P7. And I think Hamilton is completely lost. So I'll put him P8. Let's get Gasly up there in P9. And I think you're right to rate Hadjar as well up in P10.
Yeah, even Helmut Marko has been rating Isaac Hadjar. That's a very good guy to have on your side, Spanners. Is Helmut Marko, who's normally notorious for saying bad things about everything and everyone in his sites. He likes Isaac Hadjar, and so with Hadjar without a contract next year, that is kind of a revelation to me, because that means he might well possibly be back, and very likely be back. Can I actually bring up something? You mentioned Hamilton struggling. This is important because Ferrari, there was a report today that came out that they're going to bring some upgrades, or as Matt Trumpets very correctly corrected me the other week and said they're not just upgrades, they're updates, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be quicker. That's very good by Matt. Now, they're coming for Imola. They won't be here at Miami this weekend. Then the full package will come after Imola, so it will come at Barcelona a couple of weeks later. Those updates are set to address some sort of rear instability and downforce with the Ferrari. So Lewis Hamilton's confidence under braking and entry, that the data shows this. He's been struggling compared to Charles Leclerc exiting corners in particular. He's been fighting the car too. You've pointed that out a lot, Spanners, as well. So these updates or upgrades that Ferrari are bringing could certainly help Lewis Hamilton's confidence in the car, because he is not liking the rear end. It's not helping him under braking. It's not helping him with traction under corners. So come Imola and come Barcelona, that may be the turning point in Hamilton's confidence in that Ferrari, because I do think the raw pace is there. And with a sprint this weekend too, we may as well see him win another sprint, because they can run the car lower again. But let's see.
Yeah. I think, I honestly, until Ferrari sort out whatever thing it is that they misunderstood how low they were going to be able to run the car, that just feels like, that's such a frustrating mistake to make, because that means that they've based their whole aero concept on a lie, and they've just got it wrong. They've just fully got it wrong. If you can't do what you want to do because you've got to run it higher, and that destroys your whole aero platform, then you go, I don't have confidence that that's not like a little tweak. Instead of going, okay, it works at this ride height, they now have to go, what's the ride height at which we can actually do it? Or do they have to stiffen the suspension, or do they have to fundamentally change the car? The concept that they came with doesn't work. So now what they're having to do is they're like a golfer with a bad slice, and they're now going up to every tee shot knowing they've got a bad slice, and they've got to aim left to allow it to slice back onto the fairway, but they're losing overall length, aren't they, with their drive now that they've got like a basically a horrible controlled fade. And Hamilton's form is really poor, and we've come up with all these reasons, but it's way poorer than anyone expected. It's way poorer than you would say, okay, you've got to give someone time to bed into the car. And the first few races, you go, well, yeah, Sainz is struggling as well a little bit. at Williams, but he's not now. He seems to have kind of got over all of that, and Hamilton's nowhere near getting all of that. You could argue that Leclerc's a different challenge and a different beast to Albon, but right now, all of those things are excuses, and we're finding excuses for Hamilton and Ferrari. So until either of those two things change, I'm not going to sit here going, oh yeah, well, if that just one thing is different, everything's going to be okay. Do you know what I mean? And like, we're just sitting here just trying to cope, and I'm not willing to do it anymore.
I don't like that, because there's a few people have said that. You know, we jump on the podcast and they go, "Oh, you guys are just coping." It's like, no, we're not coping. We did this with Liam Lawson in the Red Bull. We're trying to come up with excuses for why Liam Lawson wasn't good too. So why can't we do that with Lewis Hamilton? I think there is a genuine, you know, if he doesn't figure it out with these new upgrades and updates, like, when do we start to think, okay, I don't want to say Lewis Hamilton's washed, but maybe he's not at his best. You know, the guy's entering his 40s. Well, he's in his 40s, excuse me. He turned 40 this year. So to me, there's no problem with that. You know, Michael Schumacher was the same to end his career. I thought Nico Rosberg had him at Mercedes. Yes, Schumacher had been out of the sport for a while, lost his rhythm, you know, wasn't at his very best. But, you know, I do think there's no problem up with, you know, reasoning for why Lewis isn't as quicker. And so far, the data shows that. He's struggling out of corners and he's struggling with rear stability. These upgrades are going to help that. Now, what happens if it helps Charles Leclerc more? Well, we're going to have the same gap between the two. So, unfortunately for Lewis, he'll get comfortable with the car, but then Leclerc will go quicker. There is that situation too.
So, at the moment, I would just say Hamilton is a struggling second driver at Ferrari. That's what the evidence shows at the moment. Yeah. If that evidence changes, if he starts getting up to speed with Leclerc, that's his target. If that happens, then we can start talking about Hamilton again. But until he starts matching Leclerc's performance, he's not in the conversation. What we're talking about now is how Leclerc and Ferrari can do. Hamilton hasn't put himself in that conversation yet.
It's been too long, like, since we regarded Lewis as the best in the sport. Like, when did that, if we had a wrestling, like, heavyweight belt, did Verstappen take that belt, Abu Dhabi 2021? Would you say that was the changing of the guard?
Yeah, but that was because, you know, somebody else came into the ring with a chair and hit him on the back of the head. Yeah. The tag team partner came running in. Let's not do Abu Dhabi 2021.
No. I'm just saying that was the last time we regarded Lewis as, wow, the greatest, you know what I mean? The best driver in the sport alongside Verstappen. That was the kind of shift in the guard. So that's when the heavyweight belt was exchanged.
Well, Russell, quote unquote, beat Hamilton 2 seasons out of their 3 seasons together. And he recently made a claim, and he said, you could argue that if I had my career 5 years earlier, I would be a 2-time world champion, i.e., had he been Hamilton's teammate during the Mercedes dominance, then he would have won 2 titles because he beat Hamilton on points for 2 seasons. Discuss.
So this article came out a few days ago. It's behind a paywall, so a lot of people didn't read it. And I'm actually very surprised because there are some good quotes in here. 5 years prior would be 2017 to join Mercedes.
Hang on, we need to say which publication it is, don't we?
Oh, yes, it's New York Times. Yes, there you go. Now, he joined in 2017. Mercedes won the titles each and every year up until 2020. I was going to say 2021 as well, but that was just the constructors. So that he's basically saying out of 17, 18, 19, 20, he would have gone 2-2 versus Lewis Hamilton. The other thing is, he was younger back then. Is he saying that with the same age and knowledge if he had appeared? Like, he's also then going to have to beat a Lewis Hamilton who's even younger and even more feisty. You know what I'm saying there? So, like, you can't just pick your eras. Like, it's... I do think he has a valid argument. I do think the quote was a bit blown out of proportion to say, oh, George Russell's going, I would have been a 2-time world champion. He's saying, no, there is an argument that I could have been. And he's right. Like, he went in, as soon as he joined Mercedes, they haven't had a championship winning car. And it's fair to say he could have won a championship, I'd say, if he joined in their prime era.
So he's saying in 17 and 18, when Hamilton was battling Vettel, he would have not only beaten Hamilton, he would also have beaten Vettel as well. So,
and Bottas.
And well, Bottas wouldn't have been racing because he'd have Bottas's seat. I think the critical thing is you can't compare a title contending season in a team to a season where you're struggling to get up into the higher end of the points. So my overwhelming take from their time together is during that time, Hamilton was fighting the car and trying to get the car up and running. It isn't a conspiracy that they were running tests and experiments on Hamilton's car and using Russell as a bit of a baseline. You know, that's just what the Mercedes team said that they were doing, because they knew they weren't in a place to fight the championship. Therefore, Hamilton's eye wasn't on winning week by week. It was trying to improve the car. Russell had one focus, and that was beating Lewis Hamilton, even if that meant a suboptimal strategy, even if that meant holding them up. That was his pure, career aim. And I'm not even knocking it. That feels like a reasonably good aim, because you get to say things like this. But had that been, okay, that car is now the dominant car they had in 14, 15, 16, for example, and Hamilton's focus is no longer trying to fix the car, it's I need to beat George Russell. Does anyone really think that George Russell, we can de-age him, so we can make him 5 years older? Or in fact, how much, when did he join Mercedes proper? 2022?
2022, yeah.
2022. So to get him in for 2016, we're going to have to make him 8 years older. Let's make him 8 years older, so that he's the age he was when he joined in 2016.
So he's 23 years old, you're saying, in 2016.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make him that age. In fact, in 2014 to make it that dominant era. So in fact, we're gonna have to age him 10 years to match him to a Lewis Hamilton 10 years ago, and say you were going to take 2 titles off of it. I really don't. I don't see it. And I don't think that. I think it's a bit of a stupid argument, to be honest. It's a stupid thing to say.
Not even one? You don't even see one title? I think there's an argument that he could have one title. I mean, Nico Rosberg, by the way, 4th mention in this podcast. Well done, Nico Rosberg. Made it to the Mr. Apex 4 times.
And sorry about my maths struggle about how old we'd have to make George Russell there. No, I mean, personally, I think he's having a good season now. But the past 3 seasons, has he been racing as well and as doggedly as Nico Rosberg? And has he been fighting the same Lewis Hamilton that Rosberg was fighting? No. Not at all. And he wasn't fighting a Lewis Hamilton whose focus was fighting George Russell in the same way that his sole focus was fighting Nico Rosberg. It's a bold claim, I would say. He did say, well, you could argue. Yeah, you could, but you'd be wrong.
Well, the rest of the article was very good too, because he spoke about how he's putting in a lot of attention to detail on sleep, recovery. Not to say he's the only driver that does it, but just sort of the detail he said in terms of the big step forward he's taken with his psychologist. And he says in 5 years' time, that will be the norm. Again, he's having a Rosberg 2016-esque year, who, Rosberg didn't sleep with his wife apparently the whole year.
Right, good to know. Yep, thanks, Jonno.
Slept in a different bed.
Right.
Can I just clarify that? That made it sound really bad initially when I just blurted that out. But Nico Rosberg, 5th mention in this podcast. We'll leave it there. But I think
and his wife's 1st mention, so well done.
Yeah, well done. Now, at the end of every race weekend, George said he does a full lap on his electric scooter. So, in 10, 15 minutes, an electric scooter around the track, which I can confirm is proven by, did you see the video of the kid who broke into Albert Park, slept in a tree overnight for the Australian Grand Prix, and no one caught him? And I think the video's been removed and police are on that kid now. But anyway, I don't know where that video is. But he caught George Russell on his scooter when the track was closed. So yes, he does do that. And I think he's putting in a lot of attention to detail into the little things. And George Russell's being very efficient. And when you have a driver like this, if you're Toto Wolff, I just can't see him dropping him for, if they do somehow get Max Verstappen's signature. I know they're competing with Aston Martin for that. I just don't see them dropping George Russell. This guy is next level. The attention to detail he puts into himself.
Yeah, he's making his case. And I think, like we said about Piastri, maybe the ultimate pace isn't everything. You have to put the whole package together, because we've seen that Norris is fast, and I don't think that's controversial. We've also seen Norris really, he blew the chance to make last season a lot closer than it was. And so you kind of go, okay, look, Russell had this laser-focused aim, which was to beat Lewis Hamilton. Now he has a laser-focused aim to lead Mercedes. And so far, you could argue he's doing very well. My deep down gut feeling is, unless he's massively improved his race pace, there's more on the table for Mercedes. And unless I'm wrong, if what we saw on race pace against Lewis Hamilton is still true this season, then, maybe they're leaving something on the table. The other factor is, maybe a lot of the things that made Russell seem slower on race pace, like not making the correct decisions on whether to save or when to save, was influenced by trying to just get ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Now he doesn't have to do that. He can run the correct race. And what was the race where he finished second? And he gave up on Piastri ahead and defended from behind. I've forgotten which race that was, but that was a really great drive. Like, he was saving to the point of really managing it so that he could defend for that P2. He drove that race completely correctly, and I don't think we saw that from him last season when he was focused on Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. And if you put him in, now I know Lance Stroll had this claim that if you put the McLarens in the Saubers, they'd have the most Q1 exits or whatever he said. Now, if you put George Russell in the McLaren, like, mentally strong driver, I feel like he'd be able to handle a championship fight too for Mercedes. Like, could Antonelli do that if you then switch to Antonelli? So there's that factor too. George Russell this year is arguably been would you say, second best driver behind Max Verstappen? If not the best.
Yeah, that's my three, is Verstappen, Leclerc, and
Leclerc
and George Russell. Yeah, that's my top three.
Oh, wow.
I know people are going to say,
Piastri.
why aren't you mentioning Piastri? But yeah, again, I want to see Piastri compared to a teammate that isn't dropping the ball.
Well, that's
so I want to see when Norris starts delivering, then I want to judge Piastri then.
No, I don't want to go back to Norris Piastri, but this is a very good point I just thought of. If Norris doesn't win the world title this year, is he ever going to win one? Because the mental strength of having a world title under your belt. So let's say Norris does get it done this year. Next year, he's not going to be making mistakes in Q3. He's going to be driving confidently and knowing, hey, I'm a world champion. Everything's all good. I'll figure this out. Whereas if he doesn't win it this year, next year he's on the back foot again. If they have a world championship car, he goes, well, I need to string this lap together. This is important. And that baggage, the baggage of not winning a title is important. Look at the baggage Max Verstappen had in 2021 compared to how we went about things in 2022. You get that first title under your belt. It makes a huge difference.
Jonno, Max is winning this season. I don't know if that's going to disappoint some people. Verstappen's winning this season.
I don't know. Let's wait and see.
Let's speculate wildly. Is this your first missed Apex? My God. The last bit of news is that the Mexican Grand Prix has extended till 2028. So there's now going to be a Mexican Grand Prix in 26, 27, 28, which has led Tuomo on YouTube to declare that must be confirmation that Sergio Perez has been signed for a 3-year contract with Cadillac. And so this makes a lot of people angry. However, I think the second that Lawson got dropped from Red Bull, that is vindication that Red Bull was a struggle to drive and that Perez didn't have a fair crack at the whip, or, at least that was not representative of the Sergio Perez that I have been a fan of since the year dot. So personally, I'm really happy to see him get another chance to come back into Formula One. And furthermore, when you look at Perez's performance from the midfield when he was at Racing Point / Force India / Aston Martin, he is the perfect driver for Cadillac, because on his day, he might be a little peaky. He might not be the most consistent driver, but on his day, he will pull out a tyre strategy that will get you a random podium. He got 9 podiums from cars that did not deserve to be on the podium because, maybe he was running a bit of an alt strategy. Maybe he was extreme tyre saving or just went for it. But he may well deliver Cadillac in their first season the random podium that gets them all celebrating, gets the champagne corks popping, and I get to have a little vindication dance.
Won a race in a Racing Point in 2020 as well.
From the back of the grid. Went all dropped to the back of the grid.
Lucked into it a little bit, like, all midfield teams. Name me a midfield driver that's won a race who hasn't lucked into it. Well, maybe Sebastian Vettel 2008 in the Toro Rosso. That was pretty good, actually. But he will also be in attendance this weekend, Spanish. So if you do see him, get a selfie for us and do ask the question, are you signing with Cadillac? Because they're holding an F1 team launch event on Saturday. Basically, they're going to show their livery to everyone and reveal it for 2026. So there's more speculation that he is in attendance to then attend that event, and then they're going to announce him as a driver for next year. I think it's a great pickup, and you need experience to develop a new car and have somebody who knows how an F1 team and car works, especially one that was at the top, like the Red Bull.
I used his toilet once, just because I don't know where you're supposed to go, and I just needed a wee.
But, is it true? Yeah. Where was that?
I don't want to say. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, I will look out for Sergio Perez. Oh yeah, I forgot. I forget we're talking about a race, and I'm gonna be there. And suddenly, I have a different opinion about sprint races because when you're at the track, the sprint race is a godsend, really. So instead of a Q3, yeah, for the people attending, the sprint race is amazing.
Well, did you see as well, talking about drivers coming back, that a CEO of one of Franco Colapinto's personal sponsors, they were doing a news cross, and apparently weren't revealing. Yes. Yeah, weren't revealing when he'd be back in the sport, and then he let it slip during the ad break that he'd be driving an Imola. Yeah. Now, if that's the case, this is Jack Doohan's final race weekend in Formula One. That's not good.
But that's exactly what we expected, though. That's what we expected at the start of the season. All those rumours were it was a 6-race contract.
And I heard 5, 6, something like that. Yeah. So that's going to be sad. Not to say that Jack Doohan has been driving out like the Ayrton Senna out there, but he's. I would like to see him in the car a little bit more.
No, yeah, but he didn't get that killer result. So you know how like Albon got that P4 in the first race. If Doohan had just that killer result like that, then it makes it much harder to drop him, and that gets sponsors around him. I assume they've spent this time scrambling for additional sponsors to try and fend off the Colapinto money. But really, he's on a hiding to nothing. I think he was doomed from the second Colapinto's career made him a target for the sponsorship money that Colapinto can now attract. And yeah, he had basically 6 rolls of the dice to get a miracle, and he hasn't got one. And now it seems like it's too late.
Yeah. I do like Franco Colapinto too, very close to getting that second Red Bull seat over Lawson until the Las Vegas crash, which is apparently what then deterred Red Bull from offering him a deal.
It?
Now, do you want to? How much time do we have? Do we talk about this swearing ban backflip? Do we do that?
I'm not sure how interested I am, but I'm happy to hear your opinion.
So the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, is considering improvements to the swearing rules and misconduct rules. There's a whole bunch of rules in that category. Now, in the World Rally Championship spanners, which I know you watch dearly and thoroughly in every stage of every round, like I do.
I used to get a roundup on Trans World Sport on Channel 4 of 20, 30 years ago, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's how I used to watch it too. Just watch the daily wrap. But anyway, in the WRC, the drivers reached sort of a compromise with the FIA to divide events. They now define events as controlled and non-controlled. So your controlled is your media and press conferences. Non-controlled can be like when you're driving in the car on the radio. Now, you're allowed to swear in non-controlled areas and not get fined. But in media and press conferences, you're not in the WRC. So there's a chance that could come into effect in Formula One, because we did see a radio message in Saudi Arabia where they bleeped Max Verstappen. And I thought to myself, well, that should be a €40,000 fine, which is what the fine is for your first offence. But apparently the TV had, or the producers had actually added that bleep for no reason. He didn't actually swear in the raw radio. So I was kind of wondering what would happen there. The worst quote about this spanners is Mohammed bin Sulayem. This is double quote. As a former rally driver, I understand the demands they face better than most. The demands of not swearing? Like, what does that have to do with anything?
I never thought it was about swearing in the car, because to me, that's the broadcaster chooses whether to broadcast it. It's on delay and they can add the beeps, and that's fine. I think it's just once you're out of the car and you're on telly and you're giving an interview, there is no reason to then not moderate your coarse language. It's in the UK, I don't know what you have in Australia. In the UK, basically after 9 p.m. everything goes, but during the day, you just don't say curse words, you don't say anything explicit, you don't show nudity, and then the watershed happens, and then it's a free for all. I think it's entirely reasonable to say during the press conference, just use your big boy words. That's fine. I don't understand why that's even an issue. Like, you're on telly during the day. Just don't swear. That's fine. That's a really, really normal broadcast requirement. When you're in the car and you're just going about the job basis of it, do what you want, and then it's up to the broadcast if they broadcast it or not. Like, a beep is fine. We know there's been a swear word. But look, parents of children exist. Do we want a society where there's just tons of swearing on TV during the day and kids grow up just thinking
like
that
Dutch
that's
TV.
normal? Yeah, like that. Yeah. Do we want to be like the Dutch? No. personally speaking, like, okay, if there's nothing wrong with swearing on TV, then we've all agreed that, then there's no penalty for swearing at any time, and there's no problem with it. And if I get hired back on BBC Radio, I can just swear on the gardening show, right? I was a gardening host for like 4 years. Can I just swear on that? Is it everyone's happy for me to F and Jeff on the gardening show?
Well, first of all, it is 2025, and the other day, I think in the modern day, I personally have no issue with swearing, as long as you're not being insulting with it. There's a difference between swearing and insulting. Like if you hurt yourself and you swear... Anyway, we won't get into what we think is good about swearing or not. But the other day, Spanners, I was covering some athletics event at work, and it was a hot mic moment. The commentators didn't know they were on air. They thought it was an ad break. And the guy blurted the F word out. And the whole room, there's like 6 of us bursting out laughing about it. And we went on Twitter and people are tweeting about it. Then he had to apologize 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's one of the funniest things ever. I think, like, to me, swearing is not...
Oh, yeah. All I'm saying is, you can try and avoid it. I don't think you have to hammer someone and have them hung, drawn, and quartered if something gets let slip. You know, I think Sainz did one and went, "Oh, sorry." I think that's fine. If you do that and just go, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean it," that's fine as well. I don't think you need these fines, but just having a general thing of, "Oh, we act with a bit of decorum when we're on TV." I think that's okay. Honestly, I think that's okay. I don't know what the big deal is. I don't know why people want... Like, I need you to F and Jeff in an interview. To be honest, it's a lazy way of expressing yourself. It's a shortcut to getting across your point. And then when it gets overused and oversaturated, it actually loses any meaning at all, and it just becomes like a blot. It's like you're trying to do this fine hieroglyphics, but then you just end up just scribbling over it with a marker pen.
Well, when Sainz got the penalty as well for, what was it? He went to the team doctor instead of the national anthem. I just think we're fining the wrong things. And then when it comes back to swearing, what Mohammed bin Sulayem needs to understand is, yes, I'm not saying swearing is a way to get your drivers to express their personalities, but you do need to give your drivers freedom to express their personalities and say what they want, because that's what makes the sport what it is. People are attracted to that. And I've seen in other motorsport series and other sports where they don't allow the athletes to do this, and it really hurts the sport. And it really hurts that connection to the personalities. And I think what's so great about Formula One is drivers aren't afraid to have digs at each other and aren't afraid.
Sure, but I don't think you need to be explicit to do that. Okay, everyone will have a line somewhere. What if they were making like graphically, physically explicit comments? Okay, what about slurs? What about?
I'm not saying...
everyone has a point where they would go, "You shouldn't be allowed to say that." Okay, my point is a little bit different, maybe to yours when it comes specifically to swearing. But I guarantee I can find a thing. If I was a driver, I could find a thing that everyone who is now saying, "Oh, it's fine, let them say what they want." I could find a thing where you will go, "Oh, they shouldn't say that."
I agree with you.
Hang on. Political views. Yeah. How twisted up and pearl clutchy did people get when people started saying, like, being activists for stuff? Then there were people going, "Oh, just stick to racing, just shut up and drive." Then they had an opinion on whether they could say a certain thing or not. So I'm just saying I could find everyone's line. That's all I'm saying.
I agree with you, but and not to, like, I'm just trying to clarify that I do agree with what you're saying. There's better ways to express yourself than swearing. But if this is step one of stopping drivers expressing themselves, who's to say that step 2 is not going to be something worse?
So the slippery slope fallacy is that word? That's what you're doing.
And so, this is step 1 of a very, what it seems to me, an autocratic, over-controlling FIA president. With no offense to Mohammed bin Sulayem, that's the way that I interpret his actions. And so who's to say this doesn't get worse in the future?
We're out of time. Look forward to the Miami Grand Prix. We're going to be doing a sprint race review live from Miami. So if you're not registered to join us for that event, we are getting pretty full up now. We can squeeze a few more bods in, but do email me, spanners@missedapex.net. In fact, no. I can't access that email. feedback@missedapex.net. Make sure that you use that one, and we'll get you added to the list. 7 p.m. opening. It's about 20 minutes in an Uber south of the track. And then we'll be doing our race review from our crew house in Miami. And then we go home. After that, we go home on Tuesday. You can follow Jonno by doing this. Jonno, this is where you say where people can follow you.
Oh, I thought you were pointing up to like there was like an annotation on YouTube.
No,
No.
on my video screen, you're above me in the video call. So I was
Oh.
pointing to where you are in the video call, but we're not. Normally, if we were on a live stream, that would make sense. But
Well, follow me at JonnyS8, JonnyES8. I may make a TikTok soon. I may be on TikTok. Wow. It's been
yeah, but
too
you're
long.
not yet. Jonno, send me that link and I'll make sure I put it in the show notes. You can follow me at SpannersReady on Twitter and Blue Sky. Follow our TikTok. We are Missed Apex F1 and consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/Missed Apex. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.